Amanfoo, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for honoring the classes of 1952 through 1973 on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the founding of Prempeh College. I thank you for the honor to chair this landmark event. It is very heartening to learn of the efforts of Amanfoo North America to support the Prempeh College with an endowment fund. We can all attest to the influence this great institution has had on us as individuals and as a nation-state of Ghana. Unfortunately, inconsistent support, coupled with a poor maintenance culture, has led to the degradation of infrastructure and lowering of the Prempeh College standards. As alumni, we cannot sit by unconcerned while this situation persists. To paraphrase J.F. Kennedy, we ask what we can do for our school. It is our social responsibility to help Prempeh College maintain its status as a competitive first-class institution. Indeed, it is our heritage and our pride. The Amanfoo North American Prempeh College Endowment Fund, ANAPEC, comes at a critical time in the life of our alma mater, and I encourage you to donate generously to ANAPEC. And I'll go back to the word donate. I think during a business meeting, most of us, though were there, were asked to give a word as to what Prempeh College had done for them. And every single individual has something to say as to what Prempeh College have done for him. Now, here we are, Mother Prempeh is sick. The mother that have raised all of us gave us the foundation. Are we going to sit down here and let Mother Prempeh die before we do something? Or are we going to reach deep into our pockets and say, we will pamper and take care of our mom while she's alive? So gentlemen, today as you sit down and the MCs ask for donation, think backwards what the school has done for you. Thank you very much, and I encourage you all to donate great amount of money tonight. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. That's right. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav. That's Hebrew for A, B, C, D. Ladies and gentlemen, that was our chairman for today's occasion, Chairman Josiah. Shall we put our hands together for him? That was a very, very powerful appeal that he has made to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening is all about donating. It's all about giving to our proud alma mater, Prempeh College. Prempeh College has done so much for us. We have been nurtured.
We have a distinguished guest among us here tonight, and our guest that I'm talking about is Professor Acheampong. Professor Acheampong will be our keynote speaker for tonight. So I'd like for you to give a big hand of applause to Professor Acheampong.
So they're called Shappy. And I just found out this is the original Shappy, Professor Acheampong. Let's give it up for Professor Acheampong, please. That's the original Shappy. Thank you, Prof.
Ladies and gentlemen, do I have a mic? Is it good? So ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Amanfoo, good evening. It is great to see so many of you here tonight. I don't know how many of you would remember the comedian Rodney Dangerfield, but as he would say, what a crowd. It is indeed an honor to be asked to share some thoughts with you tonight as your keynote speaker. Prempeh College has so many accomplished alumni who are doing phenomenal things, and whose accomplishments far outshine and overshadow mine. It is therefore very humbling to be asked to speak to you tonight. I couldn't help but think whether my being asked tonight might have had something to do with the notoriety of my Prempeh nickname, Shappy. And it seems as if that has been confirmed tonight. Be that as it may, I'm delighted to share some thoughts with you tonight. And I pondered what I could possibly share with such a distinguished group. I quickly decided it wouldn't be something academic. You are all at the forefront of your diverse academic and professional fields. You don't need this evening to feel like just another academic or professional conference. Neither will I purport to recount Prempeh's storied history. You can read about that in more authoritative sources. And I promise not to delve into politics, whether local or global. You are bombarded enough with politics daily. Instead, I thought that what I shared tonight should be inspiring and it should be heartwarming, something that will evoke fond memories of Prempeh. I'd therefore like to talk on the subject, providence, thankfulness, and giving back. Providence, thankfulness, and giving back. And I'd like to do this through the lens of some of my own life experiences, quite a bit of which centers around Prempeh, a place that we celebrate tonight as our heritage and our pride. I was 4.5 years old, an energetic and rambunctious little boy, I am told. One day, as I was playing with my older sister, Charity, running around in our concrete compound, I fell on my face. My uncle, who was babysitting us since our parents were out, ran to pick me up. He realized that as he tried to stand me up, I couldn't stand. My left leg had buckled and had become crippled by polio. Polio killed millions of children around the world and remains endemic as I speak in Afghanistan and Pakistan. No one realized I'd broken my nose from the fall till I was diagnosed by an ear, nose, and throat specialist as an adult. I still have no recollection of that day, probably because breaking my nose on concrete also gave me a concussion. I had serious sinus problems as a child as a result, sensitivity to light. I couldn't breathe sometimes, and used nasal decongestants quite a bit, something that I learned later was not such a good thing. I'm told I had to learn to walk again after surviving polio, and as if that was not enough, I had a serious case of asthma that terrorized me as a child. It ran through my father's side of the family. But I am talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. As Providence would have it, my dad was a pharmacist, my mom was a nurse. I got the necessary care I needed, and every medication I needed came from my dad's pharmacy. And they gave me all the support I needed and a great educational foundation, beginning with Tech Primary School, and I'm truly thankful for that. But what this means, and this is something that didn't really strike me until recently as I reflected on my life's journey, is that by the time I came to Prempeh College at age 11, I'd already been through quite a bit of trauma as a boy. In a very real sense, I didn't choose Prempeh. Prempeh chose me. You see, my mom transitioned from being a nurse at the hospital in Kumasi to a private midwife and established a maternity home called Salome's Maternity Home, where she cared for pregnant women and delivered their babies. One of her patients happened to be Mrs. Osei, wife of Mr. T.A. Osei, Tao as we called him. Another one of her patients was Mrs. Boama, wife of Mr. Boama, the music master, Osukuni, as we nicknamed him. I also met the chaplain, Reverend Nyako, who would come and visit these women when they had their babies. So there was no question where I was going to go to secondary school. You see, I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. I needed to be at Prempeh. That was sheer providence. Why? Because I had serious problems adjusting to boarding school. Remember, I was 11 when I arrived, and the previous 7 years of my life had already been filled with lots of challenges. Being removed from the emotional security of my home was traumatic for me. I cried all the time. I decided one day that I had it. I was leaving. I headed for the gate near Sewa House to catch a taxi home. The night watchman asked me who gave me permission to leave, and I said the headmaster did. Of course he didn't. Wouldn't you know it? No sooner had I said that than Mr. Osei came driving by. The watchman flagged him down and said to him in Chi, "Masa, akoda wese wosi utimi kofie." Meaning, Master, this boy says you gave him permission to go home. Mr. Osei gave me a long, hard look that seemed like an eternity. And then he said, "Let him go." He knew I was having problems adjusting to being away from home. I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. So shortly thereafter, I went to Mr. Osei's house, and I told him I want to be a day student. He said I couldn't, because we didn't have day students at Prempeh. So I pointed out that an Indian student was a day student, and an English student was a day student. So he said to me, "Well, that's because they can't eat Ghanaian food." I still insisted. So he said, "Fine, but your dad will still have to pay boarding fees because this is a boarding school." So I said, "Okay, he will." Of course, my dad knew nothing about this. So I became a day student. But since my dad was still paying boarding fees, I had a bed, a suitcase, and a provisions box, the famed chop box, in Freeman House. I needed that. It helped with my adjustment, and for that I'm still thankful to this day. By the way, I got nicknamed the amphibian because I went home most days, but I stayed in the dorm sometimes. It wasn't until age 16, in sixth form, that I transitioned fully to boarding school and became so focused on my studies that I scarcely went home, not even on weekends. My dad would come and look me up from time to time. "We don't see you anymore," I remember him saying once. Imagine that. Remember, I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. Prempeh was a great school. What an excellent education we all got. Great teachers, great guidance. I'm sure you have favorites among the teachers, many of whom we gave nicknames. I certainly remember Al Fazari, and what a great teacher he was. There was one teacher I didn't care for. He had a temper. He pulled my hair once because he said I was talking in class. Yes, I did have hair once. I won't say who it is because it might be your favorite teacher, but certainly not mine. Let me just say that I thought he was a rather bad fellow. I remember talking to Reverend Nyako about my career goals in lower six, and he thought I should study French because I told him I wanted to be an international lawyer. Imagine dreaming that big at age 16, wanting to be an international lawyer. But that was the kind of place Prempeh was. We learned discipline at Prempeh. Up early, with the tolling of the bell, doing chores. I was a scavenger. That was my title. I picked litter around Freeman House. Bed inspections, morning assembly, siesta, lights out, Katanga. I know none of us would ever trade those memories. Why? Because Prempeh is our heritage. Prempeh is our pride. So I got into law school at Legon at 18, thanks to the excellent preparation I'd received at Prempeh. 3 Prempeh students were in that class: Julius Akrofi, Butler House, now a Supreme Court Justice called Julius Ansah, and Dick Anyadi, who is a lawyer in Accra. Now, one of our professors happened to be Dr. S.K. Dateba, who happens to be my uncle, now retired from the Supreme Court of Ghana. Being quite impressed by him, I decided I wanted to be a law professor just like him. So I got a scholarship to do a master's and a PhD as a pathway to becoming a law professor. And since I had a scholarship, that meant my parents didn't have to figure out how to support me financially. See, I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. The scholarship was good for any school I could get into. The only question was, where did I want to go? So another one of my professors was Dr. O.T. Prempeh. His dad, Justice Prempeh, a former High Court judge, was an Oxford graduate. He had a classmate from Oxford called Mr. Guest, who was now a senior professor at the University of London's King's College. So unbeknownst to me, while on a trip to London, Dr. Prempeh told Professor Guest that he wanted a protege of his to come to London, and he hand-carried application forms from the University of London and handed them to me. So that was where I went. I couldn't have gone to a better place where a senior British professor would look out for me. I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. I finished the master's in a year, came back home briefly debating whether to continue to a PhD because I was exhausted. My uncle, Dr. Datimba, felt that was a no-brainer. So we discussed what I would write my thesis on, and he hand-wrote a letter for me to take to the dean of the School of Oriental and African Studies, famously called SOAS, to enroll there. So I went and met with Mrs. Rogers, the dean, filled out an application, and enrolled in the PhD program at the University of London's SOAS. I thrived and even got nominated by Mrs. Rogers, who became my advisor, to represent graduate students on the board of the University of London's Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. Imagine me sitting in meetings along with people like Lord Scarman, Lord Edmund Davies. These were British judges in the House of Lords. Remember, I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. So as I got close to finishing my degree, I pondered my options. One was to teach law at Legon, and Mrs. Rogers wanted to explore a teaching position for me in London. But I happen to have a younger sister whose name is Victoria at Howard University in Washington, D.C., studying economics. And she worked part-time as a receptionist at an upscale apartment building in Northwest D.C. It was there that she met a resident called Dr. Jim Chastain, a Howard professor who had started their insurance major in the business school and was looking to hire additional faculty. I learned from him that there were about 300 PhDs in insurance or an insurance-related field in America at that time, and he couldn't attract one to Howard because they had many options. So when my sister told him that she had a brother in England who was finishing a PhD in law and was writing a thesis that had something to do with insurance. He told her he'd like to talk to me if I was ever in the States. So I got a tourist visa to visit the States, and I went to see Dr. Chastain at Howard. It was 1981. Ronald Reagan had just been elected president. Dr. Chastain asked me if I could teach a class for him because of a conflict he had. I said yes. He told me the topic. He gave me the textbook. I went and taught the class, and then I went to return his book and debrief with him the next day. When I sat down and we started to talk, he said to me, well, the students said, I better hire you. So Howard offered me a job, filed an H-1B petition for me, and just a year after I started teaching, however, my sister, who had introduced me to Dr. Chastain, transferred to Wellesley College in Massachusetts. It was as if she was meant to stay at Howard just long enough to connect me to Dr. Chastain. Remember, I'm talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back. So I left Howard 4 years later in 1985 after being recruited to Norfolk State University in Virginia to help them get their business school accredited. Just 2 years later, 1987, unbeknownst to me, a Trinidadian pastor and his family moved to Virginia to pastor a church not too far from the school. I met all three of his daughters as they came through and graduated. Sometime later, the department head for accounting told me that one of them, by the name of Nicole, had a crush on me. She lived in Texas now and was working as an accountant. I didn't think anything of it, but about a year later, a woman came up to me as I was heading to lunch and asked me if I remembered a woman by the name of Nicole. I said yes, and she said Nicole had asked her to give me her number. It took me about 3 months to call. After all, she lived in Texas and I lived in Virginia. I eventually did call. I got to learn more about her. We exchanged visits. We ended up getting engaged. She quit her job and moved to Virginia, and we got married. Before we dated and got married, I had tried for several years to find another job and relocate. I got several law school interviews, but nothing ever panned out. The same year we got married, I was promoted to department head, then to dean 3 years later. Then the very next year, Penn State hired me as its chief academic officer at the Monalto campus. I almost turned down that interview since I was unfamiliar with that part of the country and I had other interviews lined up. But I did go, and as soon as I stepped foot on the campus, it reminded me of Prempeh College. Not the buildings, but the trees, the greenery, the atmosphere. I took the job and turned down 2 other opportunities I was offered. I didn't plan on spending 17 years in Virginia. I went to Virginia as a single man. I left with a wife and 2 kids, and 1 more arrived after we got to Pennsylvania. It's as if, as Providence would have it, I wasn't meant to leave Virginia until the family I always prayed for arrived, and I couldn't be more thankful. So my wife, Nicole, is here with me tonight. Can you stand, Nicole, so everybody can see you? So, as you just saw for yourselves, I have every reason to be talking about providence and thankfulness. So I got promoted to chancellor 8 years after we arrived in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, that is. shortly after the Great Recession. Remember how I mentioned interviewing unsuccessfully with several law schools? Well, now I was reading that many law schools were having serious enrollment challenges and they were laying off law faculty, buying out some tenured ones. Meanwhile, I had the security of being a chancellor with tenured professorial rank. Is it any wonder that I am talking about providence, thankfulness, and giving back? As I look back over my life, I can't help but see the fingerprints of providence all over my life's journey, and I couldn't be more thankful. I have tried to give back by teaching and mentoring many people, not just in the classroom, but also in many other ways, whether it was reading a story to a grade school class, mentoring professors towards promotion and tenure, nurturing and coaching other leaders in higher education administration, or teaching adults and senior citizens in Sunday school. I've also tried to give back to worthwhile charitable causes, such as food banks, homeless shelters, the church, extended family in need, and to those suffering from natural disasters. As I end my remarks, I'd like to ask you to look back on your life's journey. See if you don't detect the hand of providence along the way, for I doubt that you got here all on your own. And if you do see that you have been blessed to be where you are, then I hope that you will be thankful and make a commitment to give back. I hope that you will be thankful for the loved ones and friends who've been there for you, and to the good Lord for blessing you to be alive and well and to be where you are today, especially when you reflect on the fact that many of the schoolmates we started out with and spent time with at Prempeh College are no longer with us. Talking about giving back, the folks who organized Amanfoo North America have had the foresight to establish the Amanfoo North America Prempeh Endowment Fund, or ANAPEF as they call it, to support Prempeh College. I had the opportunity to ask lots of questions about the fund in a conversation with a member of the board. I learned that they invest funds raised by ANA through Fidelity Investments, that the investment philosophy is moderately conservative, that they have accountability measures in place, that they were planning to establish a committee that would receive and vet requests to support capital projects at Prempeh College, that disbursements would only come out of investment returns and not principal, and that because they're registered as a 501c3 organization, all donations are tax deductible. Prempeh had 8 houses and 800 students when I was there. Today I understand they have 3,000 students and 9 houses. That's a whole lot more wear and tear on the infrastructure. Without renewal and refurbishment, the facilities will eventually become dilapidated from deferred maintenance. I hope that you will all consider making a generous contribution to support Prempeh College, the alma mater we all remember so fondly. In doing so, you will be affirming that Prempeh is indeed your heritage and your pride. Moreover, in making a commitment to support the school that served as a springboard to launch you to where you are today, you will be acknowledging that you too have been the beneficiary of providence, that you are thankful, and that you will give back. Alors, comme dira mes amis francophones, so as my French-speaking friends would say, merci infiniment de m'avoir donné cette occasion de partager un peu de mon histoire avec vous. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share a bit of my life story with you. J'espère que vous avez été inspiré. I hope you've been inspired. Thank you very much and God bless.